The next 27 minutes or so, we're going to talk about these things, trends and where we're headed, and some strategies about how to take advantage of that as marketers. And we have a great group of folks. I'm going to let them introduce themselves very briefly to give a little background, but a good varied group, and then we'll get into it. So maybe start with you, Mike, on the end.
Sure, thanks, Ross. And thanks for Contact.io and everyone for having me. So this is very exciting. It's a topic that I've been looking at for the last year or so. So I'm coming at this from the analyst perspective. BI Kelsey, for those of you unfamiliar, is a market research and analyst firm. Think of us like a Gartner or a Forrester, but a lot smaller, and solely focused on the topic of location-based media and ad formats. And as an analyst, I cover mobile. And Chris and I were just talking off stage, and essentially what that means is I cover about 62 different subtopics. It's everything from mobile payments to search and social and all those other areas that are evolving so quickly. But one of the biggest areas among those subtopics that I've been covering and really sinking my teeth into in the last year or so is this topic of call commerce, leading to all those numbers I mentioned, in volume, in quality, in value, in advertiser perceived ROI, and all of these other things that we'll probably get into. It's a very exciting area. Phone calls, driving them, measuring them, all the technology that's evolving around scoring leads, how that's tying back into the marketing discussion and helping call centers run more effectively and all that good stuff. So I'm sure we'll get into all of that. That's the stuff I'm looking most at. Glad to be here.
Hi everybody, I'm Chris Menard, and I'm at Google, and I've been here about 12 years, about the last 2 years focusing on calls. And I'm a global product lead, which essentially means that I'm helping to drive strategy and helping to bring products to market with our marketing teams, our product teams, and our engineering teams, and really helping to service the customer and decide like what are the right things that our customers need and our users need with respect to the action of making a phone call. So I'll keep it brief.
I'm Dan Williams, Chief Revenue Officer of 3 Day Blinds, a 40-year-old window treatment manufacturing company, and I'm attempting to innovate how we market and treat customers and sell blinds.
Great, thank you. So, as you can see, we have a gentleman in Mike who's tracking all the trends, and then we've got Chris from Google, who is a large technology provider and data provider, obviously, in the space. And then with Dan here, a practitioner, and is doing some amazing things and has some interesting data that hopefully you'll share some of that show the impacts of some of these new technologies. So I thought we would start with the connection of search and phone in a single device. And while this has unlocked great potential for marketers in unlocking a consumer's intent and being able to optimize for that consumer interaction, I think we've seen a trend where a lot of the advancements in clicks and leads have not yet fully translated into the world of calls. And so I thought I would start with an open question of what are you seeing in the call marketing world today, where maybe it's advancing, but it still yet hasn't caught up to all the learnings that we've learned over the years from clicks and leads, and how we've optimized. And I think I'll maybe start with Mike, just looking at some of the trends, and then we can kind of go down the line, and Dan can talk about what he's experiencing firsthand.
Sure. So we heard from Jeff in the keynote that the telephone is a 150-year-old device, but it's outperforming a lot of newer and sexier media and lead forms. One example is clicks. But I think that it hasn't yet really gotten its due credit as a strong lead form yet. And I like to quote Irv Shapiro, who is the CEO of Dialogue Tech, and he says, phone calls are the Rodney Dangerfield of the digital age, and that they just get no respect. But we're starting to see that change. Calls are sexy again for the precise reason that you mentioned, Ross, that it's kind of associated with the smartphone. It's bolted to a device that is a very strong computer. It's a search and discovery device, and the handoff from that to phone calls is a natural one. And that leads to some of the data that we've projected at BI Kelsey, such as the fact that right now 93 billion calls are driven to business from mobile. That's going to grow to the number you mentioned, 162 billion by 2020. Another data point there is that we're going to see $1 trillion in US consumer spending influenced by phone calls in some way. So somewhere along the path to purchase, phone calls are influencing that commerce. Now the reason why that number is so high is because of the call volume, but also because it tends to happen in categories where there's a great deal of complexity. You need to talk to another human, and those tend to correlate to high ticket items, autos, financial services, things like that. So the margins in those products as a corollary makes the lead formats likewise carry premiums. Now, to get more to your question about what are we seeing, how are we seeing all that translate into lead-based marketplaces and following behind what we've already done a lot with things like clicks. I think some of the areas that I'm seeing that are still pretty nascent, but there's a lot of area to improve. We're already seeing so much advancement in what Google's doing in search, in the search realm with things like call extensions. One thing that's a little bit younger, but I'm watching, is I think it's going to be interesting to watch play out in the ways that your question's getting at, Ross, is within social. We're seeing the rise of the buy button and these calls to action throughout app-based experiences. And so far, these are just more about e-commerce, buying something. E-commerce currently represents only about 7% of US consumer spending. The rest is all offline. So I think we're going to start to see a blooming of these call to action type buttons throughout app-based experiences that are less about buying something and more about transacting offline around me, and a big portion of that is going to involve phone calls. So I think that the driving and the tracking of calls, in the same way we've kind of learned and developed an art around it in the search world, is going to start to develop in the world of social and social apps and interactions.
So with respect to calls, yes, calls are Rodney Dangerfield, but we need to get calls at the level that's normal, right? So everybody in here is here because we drive phone calls. We know that there's success. We know that there's great value in those calls, but we need to make sure that as an organization and as an industry, we talk about it in the same way. We have to make sure that we're in the conversation across all digital. We have to make sure that we're looking at our call centers in the most efficient way. We spend hours and hours debating over what color blue is on a landing page for a mobile page, but we don't spend the same amount of time in a call center optimizing that call center experience so there's 10 seconds less for a person on the hold, or so that they have an experience with the right voice that matches, maybe their language or their accent or something like that. There's a lot of things that we could do here as an industry, just make sure that we're on par and bring calls to being a first-class citizen again, and that will continue to let us to drive more calls and continue to show value across the board. And I see this a lot, and I think that this is an area that we should try to move forward with.
Yeah, Chris, one comment there. We had talked ahead of this panel, and one of the things I think you had mentioned, it might have been you as well, Dan, was in the world of search marketing, like say 10 years ago, you searched for something and it shows up at a home page for the most part. And today, it might show up at a different page within that funnel because it's more relevant to the search itself. But in call marketing, haven't necessarily seen that yet, and so it's an example of one of the areas that we can potentially learn from some of the advancements in search marketing and apply those same things to call marketing.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Like today, consumers are expecting to get to a landing page about what they're talking about what they're searching for. And we don't really do that very well with calls, right? You sort of get the phone call, you sort of go through the IVR as a user, and you get there and you need to explain it to the agent. And the agent, I would generally say, is an agent back where before we had caller ID, right? They don't necessarily know what's going on. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know what the person is calling about. God forbid I have to transfer from one person to another. The user has to re-explain themselves. Like, this is not a good experience across the board. And so I'd like to see us moving in a direction like this. It will only increase the conversion rates that we're seeing on calls.
One quick note on that, it strikes me that as you guys are talking about that, it's very analogous to the topic of deep linking that we're hearing about so much in the app world. It's deep linking for calls, essentially.
Yeah. Makes sense. So Dan, so you're a practitioner of call marketing and digital marketing and search marketing. So what are your thoughts on this topic?
Well, I'll give you the example I talked to you guys about. My marketing team was, we were trying to brainstorm how we can get higher conversion rates. And we're not an e-commerce company, and we're not nationwide. We have salespeople, design consultants that are employees, not contractors, go to someone's home. So there's an appointment. It's much like solar or flooring or any other home improvement type business. So we need an appointment, and that's how we judge how well we're doing, is generating in-home appointments. And we were thinking about ways to generate more appointments without spending any more money. We could always spend more, but what can we do with all the traffic we get? And my team came up with this elaborate plan to improve our mobile online booking system. And it does need improvement, I admit. But we looked at the numbers, and 75% of all our appointments are scheduled over the phone. So I said, if we increase 2% our conversion rate on phones, that would equal 300% conversion rate on mobile online appointments. So basically, we were wasting time on stuff that didn't matter. We just need to focus on the call center, 22 agents, and get them better data so we can schedule more appointments. And that was a realization we had a year ago, and we spent a lot of time and energy trying to improve data and figure out how we can make it more personal, how we can pop the search term that they clicked on, so the agent knows that they searched on shutters or Roman shades or whatever.
Yeah, so I don't know if everyone caught that stat, but one thing that Dan shared is their particular conversion rate on a call, and conversion is gauged by call to appointment conversion, right? But if you get so many appointments, you're going to convert so many of those into a sale. But the conversion rate on an inbound call is extraordinarily higher than the conversion rate on somebody who sets an appointment through the digital path, right? And so I think you said an extra 2 points of conversion on the call path equals like a 300% growth in conversion of appointments on the digital path. So for these guys, they're tracking the data, and it's showing the differences there in digital and call marketing. Great, so let's switch gears a little bit. So long before the convergence of digital and voice into the smartphone, there's always been growing use of data in the marketing world, and in particular third-party data. So Chris, you mentioned we can use data like the search terms to add context to why this consumer's here, and we do that as a matter of course in search. We're not necessarily doing it all the time in call marketing, but we can. What about the use of third-party data? So in the call world, there's always been the identification. Jeff showed caller ID, and caller ID made a lot of strides in understanding who was on the other end of the phone, the demographics of that caller, also the behaviors and the intent. And if you look at the digital marketing world, behaviors and intent has usually been paramount. In the calling world, a lot of times it's identification and demographics, but now this is all converging. So I'm going to start with you, Dan, as a practitioner of all of this and a user of data in both of these marketing channels. How do you see those trends continuing, and how do you think about, and how should marketers think about the convergence of third-party data, and how to use it all together to create the best overall customer experience?
Well, we started using third-party data for direct mail. How are we better at direct mail? And I started at 3 Day Blinds 2.5 years ago, and the majority of the marketing budget was direct mail, which is actually fairly sophisticated, believe it or not. You think retargeting is creepy. There's some stuff in direct mail you can do that is mind-blowing. But we started looking at different ways to use third-party data and scoring households, and even how we move into new areas and expand the business. And now third-party data is basically used in every aspect of everything we do, including now, and it's a little manual, but we can score a household and know if salesperson A is going to be better suited to that household than salesperson B, and send the right salesperson to that household. And we don't really care what the data says. Maybe someone's better at closing people that own condos. Maybe someone's better at closing elderly couples. It doesn't really matter, but we're finding that it works, and we're going to start instituting some data third-party data into our call center and route the calls to the right people, and really determine who's the right person to handle that particular customer. So I think we've only just begun, and I think and we use it everywhere, and I think that it's almost limitless what we can think of to use third-party data for.
Great, thank you. And anything to add, Chris or Mike?
I'll add too, there's a delineation when we're talking about data between some of the more structured data, such as caller ID, who the caller is, what their kind of past history might be, and that's invaluable for the things you're talking about, Dan, such as smart routing, making sure that the warmest leads go to the best reps or regionally relevant reps and things like that that really help with kind of quality control and close rates. But also I think there's another level to this, which is after the fact, what is said on the call, which is the less structured data and really kind of the challenging part sometimes when really, when it comes down to things like lead scoring. And that's a very important aspect to all of this, obviously, but usually it's very expensive because you have to have kind of humans discern things like voice tone, and was that a good lead, was it a bad lead, and we're starting to see some interesting technologies emerge that are using machine learning to do that. So I think that's going to start to be interesting when we see kind of Moore's law kick in, and if you can kind of discern that same level of quality scoring algorithmically, I think that'll really start to kick all of this into high gear.
And it's all about the conversion at the end of the day, right?
Yep.
So I have debates all the time whether advertisers should buy customer service-based terms, right? Should I pay for the customer service terms? They're going to come to me anyway. They're a customer. Should I pay for that or not? But actually, you should. And the reason you should is that your conversion rate is going to be roughly the same or a little bit off. I look at some of the advertisers, and I talk to a lot of advertisers, and there's one particular advertiser that I talked to saw a, let's say, 25% conversion rate on their brand terms, right? That's a great conversion rate. That's what they can expect on that. But when they looked at buying customer service terms and continued, the customer service terms were only 2 points off from that. So it was only 23%. So it's the end result. So like, let's take all the data, let's take all the context, let's take everything in, and let's measure what the end result is, not necessarily what the inbound result is. And that will help you to be the more optimal channel. And this is something that people need to look at all the time. And it's a debate that we have, and we honestly shouldn't be. It should be like,
And that data has so much value in not only being able, get that later. In not only being able to prove out ROI to any given advertiser, but also to just kind of iterate tactics on an ongoing basis and A/B testing and feed that back into which ad group produced the best leads and all that kind of stuff. So I think that iterative part of that whole discussion is important too.
Well, it's the same thing that we need to do for landing pages that we've been doing for a long time. Now we need to do, like I said, we have to make sure that we do this.
I'm going to grab my iPad, excuse me.
Dan, a follow-up question for you there. So, you're an experienced user of third-party data, first-party data to drive the optimal interactions. With the wealth of data now available from third and first parties and different third parties out there, sort of how do you go about testing, different sources and, making sure that you're being fully optimal with all the resources now at your disposal? Sort of how do you think about that?
Well, that's a great question. I don't know the answer, really. We're constantly looking at different variables. We have human beings driving cars to people's homes. So weather is a factor, so we're instituting a BI system in the next month that hopefully we're going to be able to pull in weather data as well as, by zip code, and we market by zip code. And we also have an interesting dilemma that we have capacity issues. So imagine that, your marketing efforts are kicking ass in Chicago and you have to turn them off because you don't have enough salespeople. So we have to look at everything in so many ways. I don't have the answer yet, but we're instituting BI systems so we can get closer to the answer. There's cancellations, there's average order size, there's all the third-party data to layer on top of it, and then there's snowstorms. So it's pretty crazy, and we have to rely on all the tools out there. We test vendors all the time. And we will, do bake-offs as well and figure it out. And we're still doing it. We've done a lot in the last 2.5 years, but we have a long way to go.
Yep. It makes sense. So, but A/B testing and sounds very important to be able to take different data sets and just try things and test them out.
We A/B test landing pages. We don't A/B test conversations. Right. 75% of our business inbound phone calls and we're not A/B testing conversations. So all those things are going to happen soon. We're really going to focus on, the call center and make those changes, because you're right. It's, we're making the website blue or brown or whatever, and it's 25% of our business.
And when you say A/B testing conversations, you're talking about maybe different scripts for different types of segments, and maybe along the lines of what Mike was talking about in terms of machine learning, about different language that causes different actions.
Exactly right. And we have the data, so we know every phone call and what sale it generated. We know, and appointment cancellations are a big deal too. So we know if there's a particular agent that has high cancellation rate, maybe they're being a little too pushy. So again, there's a lot of variables, but our focus this year is really going to be on the call center.
Makes sense. So, I think a common theme, and I think is a great takeaway as we were approaching this conversation, is just, it's a lot of the same concepts that have always been around in marketing, but it's different data, it's different communication mechanisms, but important to keep doing the same kinds of things in terms of testing and optimizing as you go forward. So switching gears, and it's somewhat of a segue into the operations of a company. And as we think about inbound call marketing, which of course has been around for a long, long time, both prior to the digital revolution as well as during and now, but it's now available in a different way. And so the way that companies' operations and call centers were built often were built for the environment 5, 10, or 20 years ago. And as we think about, there might have been two types of calls in the past. There might have been sales calls that were very clearly indicated by an 800 number that was dialed, and there might have been customer service calls that had a different number, and consumers didn't always get it right. But the way companies built their call centers and operations around those things weren't always optimal for every single call. And are there still situations today where those operations have carried over to this brave new world where things are very different? So maybe just an open dialogue about that and where some of the optimization opportunities are in sort of recreating our company's operations for the new world that we live in today.
I'll start there. I think there's an interesting trend we're seeing where the call center used to be primarily under the control of the CIO or the IT department. More and more we're seeing it under the marketing department, which makes a lot of sense because marketing and support should be interrelated. So much money is spent, so much effort is spent bringing in business. To be able to link that to the support, which leads towards the retention of that business, makes sense. But the larger point also, in terms of organizational trends, is that you've probably all heard the famous Gartner quote that by 2017, which I guess now is only a year away, the CMO's technology budget is going to be greater than that of the CIO. And what that means essentially is, with the trend towards lower barrier, democratized, SaaS-based software that doesn't have that big kind of upfront investment and having to get the approval of the IT department, the marketing department or the CMO of the organization can operate with a lot more agility in terms of budget, political capital, being able to buy and implement a lot of these kind of advanced call analytics and other things that are making the call center operate better. So I guess that's all to say that besides all of the advancement of these technologies out there, the actual organizational dynamics are also moving towards just a hell of a lot better and easier implementation than CMOs have had in the past.
I see that all the time, and I'm so glad that it's moving into the CMO hands, because that helps. Like, I mean, if you just compare a conversion rate and volume, like, you're going to invest a hell of a lot of money in the call center because it works, right? And so if it's over in the IT department, or if it's over in service, like, they're looking at reducing costs because they see it as a fixed asset, right? So let's help them move it over into the right place, and let's help us to get more calls and drive more volume.
Yeah, when I started all the various call center groups, sales support, customer support, installation support, and the appointment setting team were all under one umbrella, and I carved the appointment team out and put them under the marketing team, and they're even in a different location. And we treat them as marketers, and they think as marketers, and we share the data with them, and I think it's really important to move that way. And customer service needs to also start learning how to be marketers as well, but one step at a time.
So, yeah, and Mike, interesting point you made there, and I think, Chris, you corroborated it in terms of the democratization now of the ability of any marketer to try just about anything when it comes to call marketing, right? Got great platforms out there, great data providers, and, speaking to the A/B testing that you're always, continually doing, Dan, the ability to do that now is relatively easy compared to even a few years ago.
Absolutely, and also not just the organizational dynamics and the political capital and all those things I mentioned, but just the technology itself. You see kind of APIs now do what used to require a much heavier solution. A good example is VoiceBase today announced their new Insights API, which is essentially a tool to do kind of what I alluded to earlier, lots of machine learning to score calls, and the ability to plug that in as an API. We're starting to just see the barrier go down and the friction points go down for what was otherwise, a lot of computing intensive and very expensive technologies.
Great. So we've only got a couple minutes left. Some core themes that I think I would take away from the discussion, and all of you ought to think about taking away. So the world's obviously changed, we all know that, but some of the connectivity to the old world still exists in terms of good marketing practices, in terms of data-driven marketing. The data is more available than ever today. The platforms are more available and more affordable than ever. And so to stay on top of these new technologies, and as calls continue to grow, which they're inevitably doing, to use some of these old conceptual practices in the new world becomes paramount. Any sort of final words of wisdom for the group here, or trends that you see coming that we ought to pay attention to?
I'll reiterate, social is a channel through which calls are increasingly happening. Facebook has already launched their call button, which you see increasingly within newsfeed ads and within small business Facebook pages. And I think also just advice to kind of be aware of all of these different places where calls are happening, because I think they all have different applicability to different business verticals and different opportunities, because you're all each sitting in kind of different places and attacking this from different angles. And yeah, just the awareness of the types of options that are out there. Another one we didn't talk about was Google, a lot of people don't realize, has basically a call-only ad unit, which doesn't require you to have a click-through. That's another one that I think is just an underrated or under-recognized option that's out there. So just a note towards kind of education. That's so many different places, and it's going to continue to fragment where calls are coming from, especially among millennials that have, certainly different patterns of behavior and different kind of touch points with their technology. It's worth watching closely.
Yeah, and I would just reiterate some of the things that I was talking through is we know that calls are driving volume. We know that they're driving conversions. Let's take the technology that we apply to every part of our other business, and let's apply it to the call center. Let's apply it to driving calls, and let's see how much further we can take this.
And I'm just thankful millennials don't own homes, because I don't have to market to them.
Excellent. Thank you, Dan, Chris, and Mike. Appreciate it.